Yo, what's going on, Visions fans? Figured I'd come with something a little different today where not a normal character review, not anything related to the actual game. This is a mock character that I've created. Obviously, I'm sure they have intentions to create a Sadali Crysthea character in the game in the future, but they have yet to do so, so I'm going to have a little fun with it in the meantime because I think who he is as a character would lend itself to a really unique potential character down the line. So let's jump into it. So the fun thing about this is I've made him to be as, dare I say, unique as possible because he really is separate from the other characters in the game in terms of his influence, what he does, what his role is as a potential endgame villain. Does a lot of manipulation behind the scenes, and I really wanted to try to get that feel in the character build as well. So getting into it, the character overview, for the element, I want him to have none. I want him to be the first elementalist character. It's not unheard of in the game. There are some abilities that are elemental less. But for me, like, this is a really cool thing to do where interaction-wise, he obviously doesn't have anything that he's strong against, but he also doesn't have anything that he's weak against. So really, really well-rounded in that regard, which I think would be kind of interesting. The second thing, the jobs, I created 2 brand new jobs for him. The first, Chaplain, which is technically like a military bishop kind of thing, or a bishop who serves in the military. Master of Discord is the second one, and then Time Mage is the third. For weapons, I figure Gospel would be a unique weapon to him, as well as Rod. So he'd be the first character that can equip 2 weapons, or one of 2 weapons. He can't equip both at the same time. Or maybe he could. That could be part of it. But yeah, in his image, you can see he wields both the rod and the book. I figured the gospel idea could kind of be like Thancred with the Lionheart, like he's got a unique weapon, and this could be kind of the same idea. Obviously, the builds and what the stats do, totally subjective. I'm not really getting into the stat side of things here, really just kind of thinking out loud ability-wise. Equips hat, cloth, and accessory, pretty normal, and then a move of 3 and a jump of 1, just because he's supposed to be relatively slow, and I kind of have him as the typical, like, nerdy book guy. I don't anticipate him being a huge physical brawler, per se. So, let's get into the intention of the playstyle of what I tried to do here. So, in my mind, I wanted a character that could completely manipulate the battlefield. Again, if you look at his role in the game, he's a very shadowy, behind-the-scenes person, influence over almost everything, and he's really pulling the strings to dictate how he wants the endgame to end up, and I really wanted to try to make that be the playstyle for him as well. Some of the things he does, obviously, are beneficial to you, but sometimes it backfires, hypothetically, as well, and you'll see how we get into that. The other thing, I really wanted him to be able to embolden his teammates and weaken enemies. So really, like, flip the tide. He's truly a very support-oriented character, and with the intention of being able to, at the drop of a dime, influence the team fight. So getting into what it is, overall, I don't have any of his abilities with damage associated with them. That's how broken I've decided to make some of his abilities, where he's very ability focused with no damage dealing whatsoever. So if you're talking about like Arena or the Guild Wars, hypothetically you have a character that doesn't deal any damage, and so he has to be strong enough to essentially make up for that loss of character and to elevate the other 2 and to bring down the enemy team to equalize it. It's kind of the intention. And the fun thing about this is these abilities, because they're so unique and like specific to altering team fights, I could see this character being one that's hit or miss with an AI, because obviously the AI needs to be programmed correctly, but really something that in a manual like PvE or a PvP would dominate just because of what he can do. So let's jump into it. So passive abilities, again, a bunch of these are made up. Some of them I've stolen from the game already. We'll go over them one by one. Passionate Scholar increases agility by 15%, decreased defense by 20. This is one of those ones I want him to very, very quickly be able to influence his will in the battle, but at the expense, obviously, of being a little paper thin. The second one, Divine Speed Cast. So some of these abilities would have a little bit of a cast time on them. This decreased activation time by 1,000 for self. So essentially, he would go from a mage to kind of the arithmetician, where they have insta-cast magic and insta-cast heals, where some of his time mage abilities and some of his main kit abilities would have that sudden like near insta-cast ability as well. The third one, Quiet Malice. This is kind of a fun asterisk. All his abilities that hit enemies will do a modifier damage of 86%. There's no damage on him right now, but this will allow those abilities to do damage. But the trade-off, he's going to start the battle with hate +4. To me, this is a really interesting ability where, hypothetically, you don't want to support pulling aggro, but that's kind of the trade-off for the extra damage that he would do on top of the abilities, where you'd be kind of competing to with your tank to essentially live in the battlefield. And I think this could have some really fun implications too with going boom or bust style how you play him. The next one, opposite direction, self-mastery. User generates no hate. I love this one, just the concept, and I mean the entire battle. Anything he does, he will never, ever generate hate. I think it's a really interesting idea because to hurt him, you either have to catch him in an AoE near his teammates, or just kill the teammates first and leave him last and go attack him. So kind of goes in that like behind the scenes, shadowy master of puppets, idea, if you know what I mean, where he can essentially be on the battlefield and no one will actually aggro at him. They'll aggro at the puppets, his teammates, instead. And last one, I think this one's a really interesting one. Master of Discord doubles the effect of team affinity and zeros the enemies. So affinity in this game is an underrated part of building your team, where not only will it affect, I think, some of their movement, but it definitely affects the stats, where there's I think like 20% stat boost on every stat if you have a 5 out of 5 affinity, something to that effect. So the idea here is your team, if you have their affinity built up, they'll get double. And you could play with the number, I say double, but it could be anything. Double the effect of your team affinity, and it would zero out the enemy. So you'd essentially get a very quick stat imbalance, where you would make your 2 teammates, if you're doing 3v3, 2 teammates much stronger and weaken the other 3. So really kind of interesting thing to play with. And really any combination of these 5 I think would be fun. For counter abilities, these are really basic for the time mage job. I took these straight from Ayaka. Slow counter, really interesting idea where if he does get hit by something, he can slow him down to further influence the tide of battle. Dispel counter, the same idea, where he'll dispel all buffs to a target. The third one I made, though, kind of brand new, called Mental Fortitude. So it's a chance to counter all damage, 50% to do it. He'll create a barrier that reduces physical and magical damage by 50% one time. So I think it won't stack. You'd only happen once, and then it would just stay on you once. But I think it's a really interesting way to potentially have a shield that does both. As far as I know, you can usually either do physical shields or magical shields, but not both. This one would do, I know last one's Mirage does, but that's unique. So yeah, I thought this is an interesting one where, he could potentially survive a one-hit kill with a shield like this. Getting into the main job. So this is the most fun part of the kit. The main job I've designed to be really interesting. So the first ability of the Chaplain is Mirror of Desire. I actually took this idea from Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, the prior gacha game that's still going out. There's a character there called Mastermind Zon, where essentially he can steal teammate buffs or enemy buffs and can redistribute it to the whole team. I kind of wanted the same idea here, where there'll be an AoE, and he'll copy in that AoE all attack, magic, SPR, and defensive buffs of both teammates and enemies, all the buffs that are there in the AoE, and he'll redistribute them to his team. They'll all get those buffs, which I think is super interesting, because hypothetically you could have one teammate who does the attack buff, and then Sadali would essentially take that attack buff and spread it to the whole team. Likewise, if you're going against a set of enemies who spends a couple turns buffing, well, good for you. We're just going to take those buffs and put them on ourselves also. So really interesting ability, I think, that probably is going to come into the game eventually, given that it's in Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. So what better character than him to do it? The second one, Strength of Knowledge. I think this is an interesting one. We kind of saw Sakura do it with Thunder's Protection. Add 20% element resist to the team based on the elements currently on the battlefield. So essentially what would happen is, at the beginning of the battle, the game would snapshot whatever elements there are, teammates and enemies, and if you use this ability, every teammate on the battlefield will get 20% elemental resistance to whatever elements are already on the battlefield. Again, one of those things where, if you're kind of fighting a 2v3, if you know what I mean, this will be able to sway the team fight in your direction, potentially, by hedging against the elemental weakness you might have. The third one, Aether Manipulation, so decreases all enemy status effects by 20%, or resistances by 20%, and strengthens your teammates' resistances by 20%. So hypothetically, this character, I have intentions for him to do a lot with status effects that, yeah, if you have a character on the enemy team who's normally immune to disable, well, decreasing that immunity by 20% might make it so they're not immune anymore. And likewise, if you have teammates that are, don't have resistances for certain things, all of a sudden they have a 20% innate resistance. So super, super interesting idea here, I think, where you could skew how the status affects, again, kind of that idea of influencing the chaos of the battlefield. I can't think of a better way than messing with resistances to confusion and charm and disable and all those good things. Next ability, Life Killer. Took this idea from Kane, where this is an AoE healing down to opponents, and it also dispels re-raise and courage. So the idea here being that like you throw this on an enemy team and all of a sudden they lose their ability to really heal effectively and to have that sustain that you get with re-raise from the zombie mask and courage from the paladin sub-job. So again, nothing totally new here. We have a couple different characters that have this concept. It's just not all on one ability. Kane has the AoE healing down on one of his jumps. The Dispel Re-Raise is part of Sakura's Rebel Intention. I'm sorry, that's Dispel Courage. It's Dwayne that has the ability to Dispel Re-Raise. So it exists in the game. This isn't brand new. I just think it's really interesting to put on him. To really, put a dagger in the enemy team's heart. The next one, Speech of Apathy. This is kind of like an AoE slow. It's not as potent as an actual slow, but it would be an AoE decrease agility of 10% to the enemies. So on top of, if you had that passive where like you can nullify enemy team affinity, you're going to essentially potentially nullify their agility to start the battle, but then also here the AoE decrease agility as well. And then finally, if you have it whatever, fuck my computer. If you have it as the sub-job, there's only two abilities on the sub-job. It's a physical illusion and magic illusion, where essentially you have the ability to cast one of either type, Mirage, on a teammate. So again, like I could see really fun implications in a PvE content where like you can do a physical Mirage on your tank or do a physical Mirage on your healer and really manually dictate that part of the battlefield. Obviously the AI would do some different things with it, on auto. So that's the main job in a nutshell. Again, I really like the concept here. These abilities are fairly broken in essence, but none of them do any damage. It'll just influence how damage is taken and received based upon the interactions of your team versus theirs, and hopefully turn what is a normal battle on its head. The second sub-job that I've created, Master of Discord, it's basically just a bunch of status effects. So it's the chance to, in my opinion, these are all the potent status effects where you'll be able to disable, confuse, charm, etc., etc. If you use this in conjunction with that other ability to start the battle, he'll have the potential to specifically do some status effects that maybe your other teammates don't, in order to confuse and sow discord on the battlefield. So I like this sub job as well. Obviously would be helpful in PvE potentially as well, where if you need to strategically fuck with some of the add-ons or the ads. So I think interesting idea. And the last one, very kind of generic, it's just the Time Mage, where the ability to quicken, haste, slow, embolden, strength is it's essentially just extending the duration of buffs to allies for one turn. So I could see this again kind of thing like strategically in a PvE, maybe not, it depends what the AI wants to do, but either way, Time Mage is one of the things that screws with the battlefield in terms of how turn order goes, and that can throw the whole battle on its head if suddenly someone gets haste. So the limit break, the final thing, this is not my idea. This is from the subreddit and everywhere. It's no surprise. Everyone thinks he can revive the dead. If he hasn't done so already in the game, I created a limit break to do just that. It would essentially take an AoE of a portion of the battlefield, and it'll revive all the targets in there, your teammates and enemies included, and it'll put them under a undispellable charm and berserk. So the idea here is it would AoE re-raise everybody in that circle, and then they would essentially just do physical melee only. So this would really be potent for like physical damage dealers instead of magic. I think it'd be a little broken to just like re-raise enemies and turn them into your own teammates and use all their abilities. Like that's probably a little too broken, but I can easily see a couple extra melee attacks in the battle, or suddenly zombies like throw off the hate generation, where you have a bunch of different bodies generating hate. To me, like, this would be a really fun one where obviously Sadali, who doesn't generate any hate with one of his passive abilities, could all of a sudden like just sit there and just fuck with the battlefield the whole time. So that's it in a nutshell. I had a lot of fun designing this. I think he's an interesting character. I hope some of these mechanics do get put in the game eventually. Most of them already do exist, just not in the same capacity. And I think this is a really unique character who I think could really stretch the brain, of crafting of a lot of players to maximize what he does capability wise. So thanks for chiming in, or thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll have some more character reviews and vision card reviews for you soon. So take care, everybody.